how to build the PHP runtime for Lambda. All the steps are outlined in the blog post. But I thought I did a walkthrough video on how this goes. What we're going to do is we're going to use Cloud9 to build that environment. So I'll go through setting that up. So basically we'll give this a name for the environment. I'm going to do some compilation. I'll get the most CPUs that I can. We'll also choose, make sure you select Amazon Linux. I'll explain why that's important in a second. So we'll create that environment. While that's spinning up, I'll quickly show that in this account here in this region, I have no Lambda functions and no layers. So yeah, we can see that. While it's starting up, I'll explain why it's important to select the Amazon Linux environment for this. The reason it's important that we use Amazon Linux is that for Lambda to execute, whatever we're going to put in our custom runtime needs to run on Amazon Linux instances. So the best way and the easiest way to do that is use Cloud9 to build up the binaries and the packages that you're going to deploy into. You can do that with Docker, or you can do it on a plain EC2 instance, but this is a really easy way to do this without having to spin up any other environments, and we can set up a temporary environment that's really clean and destroy later. To assist us in avoiding switching between different tabs, I'm going to copy and paste the whole script out of the post into this README file. So I'll open that up, I'll delete that out, and we have all the steps that we need to run through here. So we'll start right at the top, and we're going to make sure this is completely updated. I guess it is. We're going to install the C++ compiler and some other development tools that are needed to build all these packages. This won't take too long. Then we're going to download the source code and build that for OpenSSL. While this is happening, we'll pause the video. Okay, in the next step, we're going to make a directory for the output of the binary for PHP. And then we're going to download the source code for PHP, move into the directory of the untarzipped source code, set up the build configure, and compile PHP. So make that there. We can see that that's created that folder there. That folder should be empty. It's empty. Wait for all of those files to unpack themselves into the source code folder. Shouldn't take too long. The next steps will probably take a while, so we'll paste those in. This is going to compile the PHP binary and place it in this folder here. So at the end of this step, this folder here will have all the binaries and required files to run PHP. This step takes a few minutes, so I'll pause the video here. Okay, a few minutes later we see that the compilation step is finished. See in this directory here we have a structure of files that are in there. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at those quickly. So we have a look here. We can see there's the bin folder. If we have a look inside that bin folder, we'll see that there's that's the PHP executable. And later we'll see why that's important. What we would have here is if we were to make a PHP file, we could execute and run that PHP file through the command line using this executable. But let's just do that really quickly, just to show. So we'll create like a test file here. We'll write a little bit of PHP code here. Hopefully this will run. So if we say bin /php php.php, there we go, it did work. So hello world has come out here. So it's the output of this quick little function here. That's important, and we'll see why when we'll delete that file and put that into the package. We'll see why when we get to the bootstrap piece. So I'm going to download a sample bootstrap file, And before we change it to executable, we'll just have a quick look at that. So basically this says run that PHP command on this PHP file. That sets everything up within Lambda to execute the code that we're going to pass in when we create ourselves a Lambda function later. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that that file is executable, so we'll change permissions on that. We're going to zip up the runtime, and we'll have that ready. Actually, that zips up the runtime and that bootstrap file, so that's in one zip file. There's a couple of other pieces that are required in that bootstrap file to run the application within Lambda. That's this guzzle HTTP unit, and this composer is a dependency manager for PHP, so we're going to run composer to add these dependencies in, and we're going to create that as a second layer. So I'll grab that. So composer is now installed, and again you can see that that is saying download this file. And okay, so we've downloaded composer and we've set that up. Now we're going to use composer to install these dependencies. You can see here that we that's going to put that in this vendor folder, and so we've seen there'll be a bunch of new pieces that are in this vendor folder here. That step has been completely finished there. So now we're ready to package up those the vendor layer. So we'll package that up. Again, that's just a zip file of that vendor folder. We're going to deploy this using the AWS CLI as layers. We're going to use this command here to get the region. That will just get the region of the instance that we're in, put it into an environment variable called AWS region. Just for example purposes, let's just show how that works. There's a bunch of information you can get from this endpoint on any EC2 instance. W3M is just a web browser that runs in the terminal. So just to show what comes out of this availability, this URL here, if we were to call that, would be AP Southwest 1B. We'll quit out of that. Okay, so now we're ready to deploy that PHP runtime layer. So this command will do that. So we're going to publish a new layer. The layer name will be PHP 7.3 runtime. The zip file is the runtime zip that we created earlier, and the region is AWS region, which we extracted from this command here rather than typing in. If you wanted to deploy in a different region, you could pass in whichever region you want to deploy that layer to. Shouldn't take too long. Okay, so we see that has been published up there. And if we went back into layers here, we would see, there we go, PHP 7.3 runtime layer. Do the same thing for the vendor layer. Okay, it's in there as well. Now let's go ahead and have a look. And we see we've got our two layers here, the runtime layer and the vendor layer. At this point, we're ready to create a Lambda function that executes the PHP code. So if we were to go back to here, we'll go functions, create a function, call it PHP test. The runtime here, we're going to use provide your own bootstrap, execution role. You can create a new role or use an existing one. We'll create a new role for this example. Okay, so we're ready now to create a PHP function within Lambda. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set some layers. So we go select that compatible ARM. So we can see here this is the first layer that we deployed, and here's the ARM. Copy that out. That is also available if we went to Lambda layers, and here's the ARM here as well. We need to get those later. So we'll paste that in. So we've got the runtime layer, that's first. Add that on. So we've got one layer, we're going to add another layer on top of that, and that'll be the vendor layer. So we'll take the vendor layer from here. Ready, and we're going to remove these files, we don't need them. And what we do need is a new folder, call that source, new file, index.php. Inside this PHP file, we're just going to do a really simple function, hello, whatever. We're going to pass in an event, and we'll grab the name key out of that event, and we'll return that back. So we'll save that. One of the other things to note is in the basic settings here, we've got hello handler. We need to change that. And the handler will just be index. Okay, so if we go to test, we'll have to create a new event. And we'll say that was name. We'll pass in the value of Paul. Create that test event. We're going to use template, test that. And we can see that the Lambda executed PHP correctly. So Paul, that was passing from the event for PHP and Lambda. So this demonstrates running PHP within Lambda using the custom runtime that we did. The next step that we're going to do and talk our way through is how to add a trigger. And because we might want to invoke Lambda through, off the back of a S3 bucket or something like that. But a more likely scenario might be using a HTTP endpoint, so API gateway, to do that. So we'll do that with using API gateway. We don't need any security on this. We'll create a REST API, and we won't change any additional settings or anything for this. So we're going to do a really basic HTTP endpoint for a PHP function. Securities we'll set to open. So that will create an API gateway, and when we call this API gateway, we can see we've got an endpoint here. If this endpoint is invoked for this Lambda function, the Lambda function is going to return this. So let's just try that and see what happens. You see there's an internal server error. So this is because the structure that's being returned from the Lambda function isn't what API gateway is expecting. It's expecting it in a certain format. I'll provide a link to some more information around what that format should look like. But I do have some example code that we can work through and paste that in, and I'll talk through what this is doing. So, okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to change this PHP code to return a structure that API gateway will recognize, and we'll be able to expose that as an API. So I've built a small program that works with our bootstrap file here. I'm going to try and grab this and make this a little bigger so we can display the whole piece. What we really want is a structure. Let me execute this first, and then we'll speak through the structure that it's going to expect and what's happening here. So I've saved that function with a bit of extra PHP code. We'll run this here, and we should see. Here we go. So we've got a JSON, a return type JSON. That's going to be like an object. It's got a key runtime, the value is PHP, another key result, and value of 0. So we go back to the function. Let's just have a look at how this looks. And if we were to go test inside here, we would see that here's the structure that we're expecting to see. So API gateway is going to look for a structure that has the status code. We're passing 200. Headers not required, but we're going to pass these in, and a body, and the body should be JSON formatted, so stringified JSON. And is base64 encoded. We set that to false, but if you were to return a base64 encoded string and you set this to true, on the way our API gateway would transpose that. That might be useful if we were passing in a value to an image, and we'll resize an image and returning the image as base64 encoded string, the browser would see that as a binary object, as an image. So we'll step through the code and see how that maps up. So we have a look down here. I built a class, and the class is a reflection of that JavaScript object that returns back, and I call that class response. It has a members, the status code. Status code is 200. We have an array of headers with just key values for each of those items in the array. Content type, the core settings that we need to send through. Have an object of the body, base64 encoded, and we've set that to false. So you can see status code, the headers, and the base64 object are all set in this class initially, and the body is just sitting there as null. Now the body itself is another object. I've set the runtime for that to be PHP, and the results that we're going to pass in is null at this point in time. So when this function is invoked, we're going to invoke this through a HTTP endpoint. The event that comes through, that is passed through, has a whole lot of options within that are passed through when we invoke this. We'll have a quick look at what comes through in this event. And so what I'll do is we'll just have a quick example of this. So I'm going to take everything from that event, JSON encode it, put it into the body, and then return that response, that object that we expect. We're going to have a look and see what goes in there. So we'll save that. And we'll test that function. Typo. Okay, we'll test that. Okay, so the event passed in has a bunch of information. So if we use our body JSON encode the event, we'll be able to see what comes out of that event. Now, if we run this within the test environment, the event is going to be passed through is basically going to pass in the event that we passed in. So that's the event that we configured up here. This is still valid for API Gateway to call, and if we call this using API Gateway, we should see this be the actual JSON encoded values from that event. So we can see here there's a lot of information here. So we quickly JSON format that. We'll have a look at what's being passed in. And we can have a look here. So here, there's quite a lot of information that's being passed and sent in. If we scroll down, we see query string parameters, and there's nothing being passed in here. Let's have a look and see what happens if we pass in some query string parameters. So we say let's go number 1 equals 12. Call that again. Get the same output. Put it in our JSON formatter. Process that. We'll have a look down here. We'll see, here we go, query string parameters, and then just a key value pair that we pass through. And that we can see that comes from number 1 equals 1, 2. Alright, so now we can invoke our API using API Gateway. So we'll go back to our PHP code here, and we'll step through the rest of what we were doing just for demonstration purposes. So we're going to remove that out of the way. We know that within the event, when you can't pass through API Gateway, we have these query string parameters. So I extract that as a variable, query string parameters, and then I get the first number and the second number. If they're not passed in, I set them to 0. We create a new instance of response, which is setting up the JSON structure that we're going to return. I create new instances of the body. The result that we're going to pass in as part of the body, so this section here, is the addition of those two numbers that we're going to pass in. So the result should be adding two numbers together, and the runtime would be PHP. So if we set the result to the body that we're going to send back, and that should send us back. If we save this and run that back again, run that API, we see the result is 0, and that is because we've set both defaults to 0. If we want to call our API here and we pass in, I think I called it first number and second number. Yep, first number. So if we call first number is 12 and second number equals 10, we should get an answer of 22, and there we go. So this demonstration, we've demonstrated how we can invoke that PHP function and pass query string parameters with this custom bootstrap that's being built. There are built layers that make this much easier to handle, but I thought it was worth going through exactly what's expected and why you can't just directly invoke a PHP function in Lambda, and why you need to, why it's important to understand actually what's going on behind the scenes here and how this is being built out, some of the integration points between API Gateway and Lambda, and that should give you a pretty good understanding, and now you might want to go back and explore one of the different or community provided layers to do the same thing.